One of the most useful butchery techniques that you can figure out and learn to master at home is how to break down a chicken. Everybody eats lots of chicken, doesn't matter where you're from, you know, who doesn't? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use something called a Honesuki, an excellent boning knife. Show you a couple different ways how to do this at home. A Honesuki is a great knife for butchering chicken. Normally we talk about, you know, not trying to avoid bones when we're dealing with a Japanese knife, but these guys are a little bit thicker. They got a meatier spine. The grind is done a little bit differently, so they are a little more rugged, you know, depending on what they're made out of. You got a nice fine point for all the delicate stuff, tall rugged heel for all the rough and tumble stuff. It's perfect for the job. If you don't have one, you're missing out. In our stores, we teach a class on how to do this, but I presume if you're sitting at your computer, maybe you can't get into the store for some reason or another. The schedule doesn't work for you. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna break down the chickens in two different ways. The first way, cut it up as if we're gonna do fried chicken. It's called an 8 cut. Sometimes it's a 10 cut. Depends on, it's a real kind of culinary school sort of thing. But essentially you end up with bone in, skin on pieces. They're great for the barbecue. Fried chicken, that's kind of my favorite move. You know, doing a bone in curry, something like that. The other option, the other technique we're gonna work on is a boneless. We're gonna take the breast off, take the legs off, take all the bones out. We'll have a big pile of bones that we can make a stock out of, and then boneless meat, which is perfect for if you've recently grabbed a conro or an akachan grill. You can do up some yakitori skewers. Maybe you're doing like a, I don't know, chicken noodle soup or something. The bones aren't all that handy for you. We're gonna start by doing the 8 cut, or it depends on, you know what, the difference between an 8 cut and a 10 cut. It's how many pieces you've got when you're done, but it's also like, depends on how you're gonna cook it too. So once we get the bird apart, we'll have a better idea of what we want to do there. So I always like to start by showing how a chicken kind of operates, right? Chickens walk around like this. You know, they got a head, obviously. But, you know, the breasts are here, and you've got the thigh, the drumstick, the tail, the spine comes down through here, the wings. All right, there's normally, like I said, a neck and a head, but we generally deal with the chicken while it's on its back. I'm going to use the Masashi Shiroshu. I'm excited, I haven't had a chance to use a Masashi Honesuki yet. But first impressions, you know what, it's got a very shallow primary bevel, and that tells me it's gonna be pretty tough when it comes time to kind of get through a few bones. I know I alluded to it before, but we often tell you don't cut through bones, be careful around the bones. We're definitely gonna cut through the bones today. Step one is we gotta get the legs off. You see this little pinch of skin on either side. We're gonna put an incision there on both sides. And then you get to kind of do this like Jean-Claude Van Damme or Steven Seagal move. And we're gonna pop, we gotta pop the bone out of the, like the thigh bone out of the joint. So you'll see I put my finger back here, kind of where everything ends, and I just pop it right out. That tells us that we did a good job, that it's out nice and clean, and you do that on both sides. See? So now that the legs are out of joint, we're gonna roll the chicken over on its side. And I find I do a lot of this work by kind of tugging at it, and then I just use the tip of the knife, kind of angled down into, like towards the bone. And then that way you're scraping across the bone, and you're not gonna have, you're not gonna leave too much meat on the carcass. Now, right up here, and you can see it on this side, is the oyster. And it's a small muscle that gets a lot of use, and it tastes really good. So if you ever do a roast chicken, I suggest you tip the chicken over when you're done and steal those for yourself. If you were doing, like, if you went to a fancy yakitori place, you'd get several of those on a skewer all on their own. So here are the thighs, or the whole leg. We want to separate this for our 8 cut or 10 cut. You know, think of when you go for fried chicken. We're gonna separate this joint right in here. It's easier if you flip it over. And you can use the fat as a bit of a guide. And you see the line of fat here? Kind of, I'm willing to bet that that's exactly where I'm supposed to cut. So when you're going through a joint, you're going near the bones, you want to lean on the back part of the knife, right? The tip of the knife is usually very delicate. The back or the heel is intended for, you know, more rough and tumble kind of stuff. If you find yourself like what I just did, I'll do it again on the next one. If you struggle to get through the joint, don't force, back off and kind of figure out where you are. All right, so there we go, right through 2 of them. We've got 2 drumsticks and then 2 thighs. If you were doing a fried chicken, I would say trim up some of the skin here. Otherwise, it might burn up in the pan on you. It's no fun having burnt food. So the next part is dealing with the breast, right? If we had this kind of minus the wings, you'd call this a crown. Sometimes I know there's an Italian butcher shop near my house in Ottawa where you can buy a bone-in chicken breast and you get this whole piece. If it's got the back on it, they'll call that a crown. It's a nice piece, like if you were just roasting 2 breasts, you could do that. But what we want to do is get the spine out without chipping our knife and leaving the wings on. That's the goal here. It's kind of difficult to see, but all of the ribs on the inside of the chicken, they kind of match up like that. And we're gonna aim our knife towards a small white bit inside there. That's kind of where those 2 joints connect, where the 2 ribs connect. It's a soft bit of cartilage. So I'm gonna start with just the tip of my knife and kind of run down, and you can see them just pop there. Now when you get to the bottom, this is where we're kind of dealing with the wishbone down around here. But I want to cut the breast off so that the wing stays attached. So always make sure the wing is tucked up to the front. And I find this part, you kind of got to root around a little bit until you find the soft spot. There we go. Okay, so now you can kind of see on this side those joints I was talking about. The first one you're always kind of going on blind faith. Yeah, there's usually the little soft guy in here somewhere. If you find you got to force it, just, you know, be confident. Don't torque the knife. So this here, this is the back. You know, when you work in a restaurant, you're doing chicken stock, you can just order chicken backs by the case. Might not be the best thing for at home, unless you're making a big batch of stock, but there's a lot of flavor in there. Shouldn't go to waste. So here we got our bone-in chicken breast with the wings attached. Most of the work is gonna happen on this side of the bird now. So right here is the breastbone, and then you've got some of the ribs, right? But if you look, there's this hard white part right there. That's gonna be like, if you're gonna chip your knife, you're gonna do it in what I'm doing right now. Honesukis, while they are more rugged, they're not invincible, and it does take some practice. If you do happen to put a little chip in your knife, it's not the end of the world. They're very easily fixed, but just kind of know, like, we are cutting through bones. It might happen eventually. So what I do, I kind of position the bird so that just the heel of my knife is sitting on that hardest part. And I put the other hand over and I just go through just a little bit just to get through the bone. And the same thing, I just kind of inch it down. And if you do that, you get through the bone. Now you can go back and cut through the flesh. If you find like, okay, I got the wishbone is up here, same thing, just use the back of your knife to cut through it. If you're being confident, if you're going nice and straight, you'll probably never have any trouble. Like I've never actually chipped a knife doing this, but you know, I'm not torquey. So here you've got 2 big kind of bone-in breasts with the wings on. You're eating dinner in a fancy restaurant, they probably cut the wing off here at this joint and serve it on there, or they might even clean off the wing into what's called, like, they used to call it a supreme. Sometimes you hear it called an airline breast. You don't see that very often anymore, and it kind of just puts more meat in the stock pot that you could be eating at dinner. So to get this ready for like a fried chicken, I am gonna take the wings off, and we can just follow the natural creases of the bird here and just cut in behind it, and there's a wing. I cut the wing tips off. Some people like them. I think they're creepy, so I put them in the stock pot. But now we got the bone-in breast, and essentially we want to split this in half, right? So when you're looking at it, try to eyeball it so you've got 2 pieces that are like the same volume, so they'll cook at a similar amount of time. Something like that. And same as what we did before, we're gonna use the length of the knife, a nice pull through the flesh to cut all the meat. But then when we get to the bone, we're gonna position our knife and just a couple short, clean pushes through and you're good. And then you get a second chance. So same sort of thing, eyeball it. Make sure that you get approximately the same volume. I think it's gonna look something like that. Kind of cut down to the bone, glide over the bone, and then that one was a bit tougher, but we did it, and I didn't break a knife, so we're good. So there we go. So what we have here is a 10 cut chicken, right? It's not that we cut it 10 times, it's that we cut it and we're left with 10 pieces. So this is a pretty standard way to cut up a chicken if you were gonna do a fried chicken. You know, next steps from there is soak it in a bit of buttermilk and hot sauce. That's kind of what I like. And then get a big brown paper bag, throw a couple cups of flour and a handful of your favorite seasonings in it. Shake it up and then, you know, kind of fry it in, I don't know, 300, 325 degree oil. And then you'll have a good time. So the next bird that we're gonna do is we're gonna take all the bones out. Now, you know, we talked about doing yakitori before, maybe making some skewers or chicken noodle soup, whatever you want. We're just gonna get all the bones out, put them aside for stock, and then you'll have, you know, a boneless breast, boneless thigh, a drumstick. This is a really good thing to practice if you want to get into other forms of butchery. Chickens are generally a little bit cheaper, right? But especially when you get to the legs in this part and taking the breasts off the bone, you're gonna find it's that kind of, those short strokes is a pretty important technique when it comes to butchering chicken. The first step, you know what, we're not gonna play with the chicken too much. We're gonna just take the legs right off, just like we did before. So keep an eye out for those little weird pinches of skin. We're gonna cut them. And then our 80s action movie move, where you bust them out and give them a tug. I'm using a Fujimoto Nishiji Honesuki this time. It's a little bit different than the Shiroshu. It's got a larger or a taller primary bevel. It's going to give you a little bit of a finer edge. So if you find you're going to be doing more deboning and less splitting, it might be an argument to lean towards the Fujimoto's. The Masakage Honusukis are very similar. Just like Masashi does that shorter bevel, a lot like the Moritaka Honesuki. So you're doing those short little strokes. The knife is positioned so that it's kind of cutting towards the bones, because we don't want to leave too much behind. Same sort of thing. Go nice and high so you can get that oyster off there too. There's no sense in leaving it attached. There's two legs. Now, we can keep working on the legs, but I'd rather show you how to take the breasts off first. We can come back to those because it's a little bit harder. But if you look at the chicken now, we kind of got the cavity facing me, you know, where the head would be is away. There's a line down the middle of the chicken, and it's kind of hard to see, but that's the breastbone from the other side, right? We saw it when we split the chicken in half. That was the breastbone from the inside. Now we're looking at it from the outside. And this line is going to serve as a guide. When we go to cut down here, your knife is going to fall to one side or the other, and you're going to use that as a little bit of a guide as you're kind of removing the meat from the rest of the bones. Use the tip of the knife just like before in gentle cuts. You can kind of get in there with your fingers and kind of push the meat away from the rest of it. Okay, and normally I'm not doing this for a camera, so there's a little upside down for me. But you can see what I mean, right? With the smaller cuts, follow the bones and the joints. And then that's the wishbone coming down here, and that's going to bring us down to where the wing connects, right in here. And then that's all soft tissue, and you can just slice right through it. Right, so there's a boneless breast with a wing attached. The other side is always going to be a little bit harder, right? You got, you know, you're left-handed, you're right-handed. One side is just going to feel a little more natural. So what I do on the side that doesn't feel as good is I turn it towards me and work at it that way, and it tends to go pretty easy. If you have any questions while we're doing this, you can pop them in the comments below. One of us will get back to you, or you can send us an email, hello@knifewear.com, and someone will go over it again with you. So here's kind of the rest of this, right? So now we've got the bones from 2 chickens. We kind of got most of a good stock on the way. Now here we've got, this is a, skin on boneless chicken breast. The wings on here, if you like, you can just trim that off. Like you want to do that chicken supreme, that's what you pay $35-40 for in a fine dining restaurant right there. Right? We presume they brined it or something to make it nice, but that's what you're getting, is that piece. Now that kind of really fancy one, if you ever want to try to show off for your friends and you want to get the meat off of there, it's almost like a Frenched chicken bone. Lay it out. This really, this is one of those things that I know how to do, but I almost never actually do it because I kind of think it's a waste of time. But maybe you don't. So I'm going to cut down towards that joint using the heel of my knife because I am coming in contact with the bone, right? And this is the scary part, is I'm going to get down to it, and once you get into that cartilage, I'm going to flick it up just a little bit. It's a great opportunity to chip a nice knife, so be careful. And once you've done that, you can kind of bend it back. There we go. You really got to wrestle with it, but then you get a really clean bone for whatever reason you might want. So with this, you can take your wings. I'm going to throw them in for the stock pot. It's completely up to you, whatever you want to do with them. If you save them, if you cook enough chickens, you can save them up and then have a wing night at home. So, but now we've got essentially 2 boneless skin-on breasts, all right? Here, this little flappy bit, that's your chicken tender. That's your chicken wing. If you're doing yakitori, peel the skin off, save it. There's, if you blanch the skin in some boiling water, you can get it really nice and crispy and it won't burn up on the grill. Next up are the legs. There are 2 bones in here and a whole lot of tendons, so sometimes you want to go slow, make sure you're getting everything. And you're going to use the very tip of your knife for the most part. So follow the shape of the chicken, right? And you're just going to cut. You're going to use this bone as a guide, the bone in the thigh. You're going to just cut alongside it, and then you're going to kind of connect the dots over here. The dots being the joints. And just using the very tip of the knife, scraping along the sides. Taking your time so you're not driving the knife into the bones and breaking it. And this is that technique I was referring to where you can get a lot of practice for more adventurous butchery, right? Chicken legs are cheap. If you're doing a whole bird, the whole thing is usually the best way to get the best price on the meat. It's buying a whole animal, right? Every time somebody touches it before you got it, it costs more money. And just, like I said, lots of little cuts. Now there's one tricky little bone in a drumstick. That's your knife might slip in behind it, but just try to be mindful. There's like a little bone that's kind of shaped like a sewing needle in there. And then, that's not too bad. There's not a ton of meat left on that. Throw it over with our other stock bones. Now the part that I like to do here is double check and make sure you didn't leave anything hard behind, right? Cartilage or bits of bone. Usually in this little kind of empty zone is where you'll get something from that kind of, I guess it's the knee. So I'll go in and do that. And you might not be able to see it with your eyes, so just kind of feel around looking for little hard bits that might be unpleasant to bite down on. And then you can trim up some of the skin. Now, this part depends on what you're going to do with it. If you're going to do yakitori, you can split it here, and that's the drumstick, right? Like if you do cut it here, and then you leave, and then you split it again here. Those are some pretty common pieces to find skewered on their own. You've also got, and that leaves us with the thigh up here, right? So you could split the thigh right there, and then you'll have another 2 nice pieces of skin on chicken. You could just pull the skin right off if you're dicing it up. Really depends on what you want to do. Like, I like to leave it as kind of as whole as possible until I know what I want to do. Because if you go and you pull all the skin off and throw all the skin in your stock pot, then you're just kind of missing out afterwards. And then we can do another one. Here we've got the same thing, you know, but we're checking out the making sure that all the little bits are out of there, and then you've got a nice thing you could do with like a boneless chicken thigh like that. You could make a stuffing and get that in there. You could, like I said before, take the skin off, dice it all up, all that kind of stuff. So there we go. That's a boneless chicken. So a Honesuki, you know, it's a lot of fun if you're doing chicken. Maybe you want to try it on other stuff. You know, I use it quite a bit for, well, I say 90% of the butchery that I do at home now. We got a video with our good buddy Mike where he's doing it on a duck and a fish and a whole bunch of other stuff. You could really do anything you want with it. I like it for chickens, but you could use a more standard boning knife. Tajiro makes a pretty awesome boning knife. You could do it with a petty. Just be careful when you're dealing with the bones. If your knife is extra thin, you should be extra careful. If you want to come and do this with us in the store, come check out one of our Knifewears. We're in Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, and Ottawa. You can book online, www.knifewear.com. Come on in, it's a lot of fun. If you thought this was fun, check out our next video where Mike uses a Honesuki on a duck, a fish, and a big piece of beef. Woo! Woo!